Everybody out? Let me know. Everybody's out? Okay. All right. Good afternoon. We thank you all for coming out this afternoon. We want to first of all say, I would like to say, and our team would like to say, first of all, is that our prayers and our hearts are out to the families and our officers that have been involved, our whole sheriff's office. So, but at this time, I would like to turn it over to Captain Hall, who can actually give you the information that we need to give you. Thank you. Captain Hall.
Hey, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay. Just want to thank you all for coming out today. We know there's been a lot of curiosity. We've received a lot of calls from the public wanting to know what's going on, what we've been involved in the last 24 hours. We felt it was appropriate to do this today with you all from the media, as you are that conduit between us and the public. So I want to thank you for coming out. Without a doubt, it's been a very challenging, very exhausting, and a very emotional 24 hours for law enforcement in this county, not just with our agency, but with our partners from High Point as well. I'll echo what the sheriff said. We would ask that the public just continue to keep our agency, officers from this agency and High Point Police, their families, the families of the individuals we encountered over the last 24 hours who are hurting as well. Keep them all in your thoughts and prayers. Before I begin, I'd like to express our appreciation to a couple of folks. One, the High Point Police Department, who was there by our sides on both of our incidents over the last 24 hours. Could not have done it without their help, both their equipment and their manpower. The Greensboro Police Department as well from our first incident. They were very instrumental both on the scene and with road closures, getting our officers medical care afterward. Our emergency medical personnel that were on the scene stayed with us throughout the whole day. They're just waiting for what they might be needed to do. Red Cross, who provided food to our officers who were on a very, very long operation. And even members of the public that have called our agency or emailed, posted on social media, inquiring about our officers, or even riding by the scenes and giving us a thumb up to what we were doing. That means a lot to us. So I want to thank those people. Let me talk briefly about what we're not going to be doing here this morning. I know that's probably or this afternoon, probably what you don't want to hear. I kind of look at this as we have two categories, if you will, of information or data related to this incident. Those that are of relevance to the criminal investigators or the administrative investigators, and then the information that's not. That's the stuff that's more relevant to the public for purposes of public safety and to explain what their law enforcement has been doing to keep them safe. So what I'd like to do this afternoon is to keep both of those categories in their appropriate category and not let them cross over. So to that end, this will not be any sort of an information session regarding law enforcement tactics, nor will we entertain any questions about them. I know some of those have already been asked. They're going to meet with the same results today. We're just not going to get into law enforcement tactics. We don't feel that's of any value to the public and puts our officers in jeopardy when we do so. These are both active investigations that are not only being investigated by our agencies, but by an outside agency, the State Bureau of Investigation. It would be improper for us to stand here today and comment on any of the specifics of those investigations, so we're just not going to do that. And finally, we're not going to elaborate on anything to do with the deceased of either of these incidents, be that prior criminal record, medical information, financial information. I know we've received a lot of questions about the civil process that we were there on Braddock yesterday to serve. We're not going to go into that either. We don't find there's any value in discussing someone's personal information like that now that they're deceased. So as you can imagine, we've had a lot going on for the last 24 hours and we have a lot more to do. So we're going to go through this quickly. Some of this will be repeat of what you've heard in previous briefings, but with a slight bit of update on both to you. So we're going to go through those. We will not have time for questions. We hope you understand that. So first and foremost, yesterday morning, October 14th, approximately 8:35 a.m., one of our officers was at 4014 Braddock Road in High Point off a ski club to execute a padlocking of the residence pursuant to a civil writ of execution. When he arrived at the residence, the deputy encountered the occupant, Victor Jarvis. Mr. Jarvis initiated a brief physical struggle with our deputy, which ended when Mr. Jarvis pushed our deputy back away from him and went back inside the house, locking himself in. At that point, our deputy heard what sounded to him like one single gunshot inside the residence, and he called for assistance. Additional officers and members of our sheriff's emergency response team responded and set up a perimeter outside the house. Nearby neighbors were evacuated for their safety. During the course of the day, negotiators from our agency and at least one member of Mr. Jarvis's family attempted to communicate with him and peacefully seek surrender. Those efforts that lasted more than 10 hours were unsuccessful. During the course of those 10 hours, Mr. Jarvis continued to fire gunshots sporadically from inside the residence. At approximately 6:56 p.m., after exhausting all other efforts to get Mr. Jarvis to peacefully surrender, the sheriff's special emergency response team entered the house. During this process, Mr. Jarvis shot two of our deputies. One deputy was struck by a bullet in the jaw. The other suffered a grazing bullet wound to his upper right arm. In order to defend themselves and each other from Mr. Jarvis's use of deadly force against them, three of our deputies returned fire, striking Mr. Jarvis, who died at the scene of his injuries. The deputy who was struck by gunfire in the face remains hospitalized and will undergo surgery this week to remove the bullet and repair his jaw. The deputy struck by gunfire in the arm was treated and released at the hospital last night. As is the protocol of the Sheriff's Office, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation was asked to conduct an independent investigation. That process is going on as we speak. The scene was secured and turned over to them upon their arrival. At this time, we are not releasing the names of any of the deputies involved. Those deputies and the Sheriff's Office are, however, cooperating fully with the SBI. As for our more recent incident this morning, approximately 3:20 a.m. this morning, October the 15th, deputies with the Guilford County Sheriff's Office responded to 1200 Bells Chapel Road in Jamestown. The deputies were dispatched after a family member of Mr. Dennis Patrick Jr. contacted our office and requested we check on his welfare, as he had indicated to them a possible intent to harm himself. Upon our arrival, deputies spoke with Mr. Patrick. Shortly after this initial interaction, Mr. Patrick produced a firearm and fired a number of shots at the deputies. Assistance was requested and officers from the High Point Police Department arrived. Two High Point police officers and one sheriff's deputy fired their weapons in response to Mr. Patrick's ongoing gunfire throughout the morning. The actions of the police officers from High Point and our deputy were necessary to protect themselves and each other from Mr. Patrick's use of deadly force against them. Mr. Patrick was struck by the return fire and died of his injuries at the scene. None of the responding Sheriff's Office deputies or High Point police officers were injured during the exchange. As is the protocol for the Sheriff's Office, the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation was contacted and asked to conduct an independent investigation. The scene was secured and turned over to them upon their arrival. As in the other incident, at this time, the names of our deputies or the police officers involved will not be released. Those deputies and their officers, however, as well as the Sheriff's Office and High Point Police, are cooperating fully with the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. Sheriff Rogers and the members of the Guilford County Sheriff's Office extend their thanks to the High Point Police Department and its officers for coming to the aid of our deputies this morning. And thank you all for coming.
Can you speak a little bit to the stress this puts on you guys? You mentioned earlier, but can you elaborate on that? How much? I mean, it's been a rough 24 hours.
With your
Yeah, well, briefly, it's look, these are enormously stressful, and the stress is coming at you from all different directions. Every officer who wears this uniform hopes that something like this will never happen to them. They don't want to be shot. They don't want to shoot anybody else. We put this badge on to save lives, and we're very passionate about that, or we wouldn't do it. So it's stressful being on any scene where you know there is a very strong likelihood you may lose your life. There's also an extremely unbelievable amount of stress that you carry around knowing that you might be called to take someone else's life. And you know, as we've seen repeatedly over the years, these things are heavily scrutinized. Even when fully investigated and determined to be proper, they often follow people for many, many years. And there's a cloud over. Nobody wants that. So yeah, it's extremely stressful. But I'll say this, and then we do have to go. We've got some extremely well-trained officers at both this agency and High Point Police Department. And they're going to work through that stress every single time. It's what they want to do. It's what they're trained to do. And they're going to overcome that and be the professionals that they put this badge on to be. Thank y'all.
Thank you.